Okay, so we're back. We're going to talk about Acts 10:38. One verse. And based on what I said last time, context is important, right? Context, context, context. That's one of the things that I think beginning readers of the Bible have a hard time with, because they think, because it's a Bible, and I think it would be true of Quran, I think it would be true of the Bhagavad Gita, and any number of other religious texts, right? I have to get some deep spiritual meaning. And I think there probably are deep spiritual meanings there, but let's just start with the beginning meaning, right? That's which is on the surface, and subjects are followed by verbs, right? He said, boo, right? And sometimes we don't read the Bible that way. We immediately want to get through the text to that deeper meaning when, just sometimes narratives are narratives, and we just start there and read that. And let's focus on that first and see what happens afterwards. So context, context, context. So the book of Acts, one of the things that's happening is this geographical expansion from Jerusalem to the remotest part of the world, and with that an ethnic expansion from Jews only to, okay, now everybody gets in. And one of the steps along the way takes place in Acts chapter 10. There's this guy named Cornelius. He is a Roman, right? But he's a convert to Judaism. So he's kind of in that in-between space. And Simon Peter, one of the most prominent of the apostles, Simon Peter has this dream about clean and unclean foods. And so some of us know something about kosher, and for those in the Jewish tradition and in the Islamic tradition that avoid pork, for example, as being an unclean meat, Simon Peter is a Jewish guy, and he has this dream where this sheet comes down and it's got all kinds of animals in it, unclean animals, and the voice says, "Arise, kill and eat." And Simon Peter says, he's in his own dream, right? He says, "I'm not going to eat those things because they're unclean. There are probably pigs running around everywhere, and what else would there be? Sharks maybe swimming in the sheet. Who knows what happens in a dream, right?" And he says, "I'm not going to eat that. It's unclean." And the voice from above says, "Don't call unclean what I've called clean." Now there's a lesson. And Simon Peter awakes from the dream. These guys come from this Roman, Cornelius, and say, "Our boss wants you to come talk to him." So Simon Peter makes the connection, and he goes. Becomes a fundamentally important conversation and experience. While Simon Peter is then talking with Cornelius and with those in his household, he essentially preaches a sermon. And one of the things that he says in chapter 10, verse 38, he describes Jesus' ministry this way. He said Jesus went about doing good. And that made me think then again about suffering, but in the kind of the remedy stage. What is it to alleviate suffering? Is it, to stop the pain? Well, if I'm in pain, I want my pain stopped, absolutely. Those around us, whether they be family members or patients or counselees or whomever they might be, or whoever they might be, we want our suffering stopped, and that's reasonable. But what is it that does that? Is it the pill? Well, yeah, the pill stops the pain, but what stops the suffering? What stops the suffering, or what helps the suffering when the pain won't stop? What helps the suffering when the disease progression is such that someone is going to die? What stops the suffering when parents see their children go off to war, as soon I did? What stops the suffering when, fill in the blank? I could keep going, but just fill in the blank. What stops the suffering? And I think it's one thing to be compassionate. We've talked about compassion already. But I think it's another thing to actually do good. And I think that's part of the oath that we take in these helping professions, to do no harm, to do good, right? And I think that's a nice connection with the practices of those in the helping professions, be they nurses, be they physical therapists, be they marriage and family therapists, be they criminologists. Stop the suffering by doing good. And sometimes doing good actually causes more pain in the short run. One of the jobs that Sue had in nursing was she was a nurse on a burn unit in a children's hospital. And to make the patient better, to alleviate the suffering, wound treatment was such that more pain was caused, but it was in the hopefulness that good would result, right? So doing good, it seems to me, is not the same as not inflicting pain. Sometimes, and those that operate in the healthcare environment, they know this better than I do. Those who operate in marriage and family therapy, for example, they would know this, right? To deal with the crisis, we have to deal with what caused the crisis, and that may mean painfulness. But doing good requires it. So when I think about what Jesus did in doing good, when you read the Gospels, you see that very often, not only does he deal with the physical ailment, but then he'll deal with the emotional ailment. There is this wonderful story at the beginning of John chapter 8. That's the fourth Gospel, St. John chapter 8. And there's this story about this woman that is caught in adultery, and it's a setup, right? And they bring her and they throw her in front of Jesus, and they're going to stone her for committing adultery. And it's important to remember, and the text doesn't say this so much, but it's kind of implicit there. The guy isn't brought with her, only the woman, and that tells us something about what the writer is trying to say as well, right? That this is an unjust example of what we do when we just want vengeance. We only pick one of the offenders, not both of them. In any event, Jesus says this memorable line: "Let the one that has no sin cast the first stone." And the crowd dissipates because they know, I'm guilty of stuff too. And so then Jesus asked her a question. He says, "Where's your accuser?" She says, "There aren't any." He said, "Neither do I accuse you. Now, go and don't sin anymore." Now, some think that this was Mary Magdalene, by the way. But Jesus doesn't want to just deal with the unrighteousness of the crowd's action, but he wants to deal with her case as well. Did he get rid of the pain? Yeah, he did. But he also wanted to deal with something deeper. And that's, seems to me, what Jesus was doing when he was doing good. He was dealing with something deeper that caused or is related to the pain. When he heals lepers, he takes those who are outcast. Lepers were outcast. Takes those who are outcast and allows them to come back into the community. That's the deeper miracle right there. So when I think about what it is in the helping professions, when you do good, when you are faced with suffering, it's deeper than the symptom. And that's, what we talk about sometimes, right? There are symptoms and there are causes. And hopefully this theological reflection at least gives you something to chew on, whether you agree with me or not. Chewing is good. All right, so one more video, a short one, and then it's done.